guys, today we are going to be working on glazing our pots that we created. Okay, so I have mine right here. It has gotten out of the kiln, it's cooled off. Let me see if I can focus this in a little bit more for you guys. Okay, so you'll notice that it is bright white. Okay, they went into the kiln kind of a medium to light gray, but once they go through all of those temperature changes and it's fully dried out, it will turn into a nice white, and it feels kind of papery, kind of like a weird dustiness sort of. Okay, so what we're going to be working on today is a couple of steps for glazing. Okay, I want you to keep in mind a couple of things, which we'll talk about in the video, but I wanted to discuss this at the beginning because I know sometimes people don't watch the videos all the way through. So one of the things, or a couple of the things that I want you to keep in mind. The first thing is that you may use multiple colors on this if you have time. So if you have 2 or 3 days to work on this and you know that you'll be able to work on it because you have other things where you can come in during advisory to work on it, then you can paint multiple colors. That's totally fine. Okay. If you do not have multiple days to work on it, or say that you're absent on, the first day or something like that, and so you only have 1 day, or maybe, you can come in during advisory for those 2 class periods, but you don't have a lot of time to do any detail work. Okay, that's okay. You still need to glaze the thing, but what you'll want to do instead is you'll want to make sure that you're glazing it with just one color overall. Okay, that's a good way to make sure that you get all of the layers on there and that you get it done in time. And they still look really nice even if they have just the one color of glaze on them. They still look really, really nice that way. Okay, so your design will still pop up and look really cool. But if you have time, you are welcome to use a couple of different colors. Okay, so I have my project here. Then I'm going to be looking at brushes that are used for glazing. Okay, so these are not our brushes that we use for painting. Those are nice, those are new. We won't be using those, but we have this little ragtag team of brushes right over here. There's a lot of different sizes for you to use. So if you have any detail areas that you need to work on, you can do that. You can use a little bit of a bigger brush for, especially if you're only painting with one color, you can use a bigger brush to kind of paint over the whole thing. Okay, I'm going to actually start off with some detailed areas because they're part of the lines that are imprinted in. And so I want to make sure that I'm getting something that is small enough to get those detail areas. Actually, I might try this one here. Okay. Or maybe this one. We'll see. I think I'm going to try this one first. Okay, so I have this here, and then I'm going to go choose my first color for glaze, and I am going to be working on like the legs first because those are imprinted in, and I'm going to be working on part of the darker parts of the bee, but I'm going to be focusing on the legs first. So I'm going to go get some glaze, which comes in a container that looks like this. Okay, it's kind of a jar, it's a plastic jar. And when you get this, you want to make sure that you shake it up really well first, because sometimes glaze tends to separate, right? So like the denser stuff will kind of come down here, and sometimes it wants to solidify. And so you kind of have to shake it back up to redistribute everything. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open this up here. Okay, and I have a little bit of glaze here, and I have this here, and I'm actually just going to dip into the lid for this just because I am only covering a small area. Now, for glaze, you don't need to dip in water first like you would with paint. You actually don't want to do that, but if you were to change colors, right, so if you're using multiple colors, you would wash your brush out between colors, but I would dry it with a paper towel. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with this. Actually, no, I think I'm going to do this brush. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start with this brush here because I think it has more of a finer point. And I'm just going to take a little bit of this glaze here, just like so. And there's something important to keep in mind while you're glazing. Everything that you're glazing needs to have 3 even coats, 3 of them. Okay, so when you're glazing, if you're using multiple colors, you're only going to do one color at a time. Okay, you'll do one color at a time. When you're finished, you'll put that glaze color back up, and then you'll get your second color if you're choosing to use more than one color. Okay, so I'm going to take this black glaze right here, and I'm going to start on the detail areas. Okay, now this part's going to be just a little bit challenging, but I wanted to show you a trick just in case you wanted to also outline some stuff. Okay, so I'm going to go through and I'm going to just do my best that I can, kind of getting this where it's supposed to go. Like this. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and do his antennas right over here. Okay, and my goal is to get this kind of into the part that's been carved in, that little detail right there. Okay, so I'm kind of working through these steps. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do his eyes right over here. Just like that. Okay, so I'm painting everything that I want to be black first. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and do this little section right here. Now, so we talked about you have to have 3 layers, right? You can do another layer. One of those 3 layers can actually be a different color. And sometimes it's kind of hard to control because it's glaze, but sometimes it does a cool thing in the kiln where it kind of mixes those colors a little bit. So you can do that. Again, this is just mostly if you have time, right? If you end up not having time, you have to knock this out in one class period so that you can get it dried and glazing or in the kiln quickly enough, then I would just recommend doing just one color all over. It still takes time because you have to do 3 layers of that one color all over, but it'll go a lot faster because you're not doing that detail work. Okay, so I am getting this in here. And I actually think that I want his outline here around his body to also be darker. So I think I'm going to go ahead and paint that in. Okay, and then I have his little legs here. All right. So as I'm doing this, you can see that my first layers that I'm working on, or that I worked on, have already started to dry. Okay, and another thing that you'll notice is that this glaze does not look black, right? It looks like it's drying a gray. A lot of the glazes that you'll use will look very pastel in color, and you really want to think about what the actual label of the color is. Okay, so this one is called coal black. And so it will come out black, but right now it looks lighter than that. Okay, whenever glaze goes through the firing process, it also gets heated up just like our clay does. And there are chemical reactions that occur that cause the glaze to change colors. There's been I've seen some glazes before where you paint it on and it looks like a reddish color almost, and then because of the whatever is used to create the glaze, whenever it heats up, it actually turns to like a blue or a green color. And so that's always kind of fun to see because it's just surprising. Okay, so continuing on from earlier, we talked about a couple of things that I wanted you guys to keep in mind. Okay, so each area needs to have 3 layers, whether you do one full color or you do different colors if you have time. One of the other things, though, that's super, super, super important is that we don't want to glaze the bottom where our foot is, okay? Because if you glaze on here and then it sits on the kiln shelf, it will melt and it'll stick to the kiln shelf, and you definitely don't want that to happen because those things never come out in one piece, which is very unfortunate. Okay, usually you have to use like a hammer to like take it off of there. So definitely would like to avoid that. Okay, so I have most of the things that I want to be black. I am going to go ahead and do this outline right around here. Okay, and this is my first layer. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to do this again after I finish this outline here. Just like this. Okay. And there we go. Okay, so I'm going to show you that next layer. Okay, so I have my very first one done. I'm going to go through and I'm going to do another layer through here. Okay, so I'm painting everything over a second time with this glaze right here. Okay, so I'll go through, I'll do everything over, and then whenever I get finished with that second layer, everything will be dry again and I can start again, and I'll do my third layer, and then I'll come back and meet with you guys. Okay, so I've gotten my layers in here, and you can see it's a little on the messy side up close. I'm sure it's kind of hard to see on camera, but I can definitely tell in person that there's a little bit of overlapping maybe where I don't want that overlapping to be. Okay, so I'm going to show you a trick because I carved in his legs and around his body here, and I wanted those to be kind of set in and to have that kind of black there for like his legs and stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a paper towel that I have here, and I'm going to just dip a little bit. I have a water cup over here that I'm using, and I'm going to dip this just barely into the water and squeeze out the excess so it's kind of damp like this. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to fold this over. And my goal is to kind of just go across this without getting into that little indentation. Okay, so I'm going to kind of bring this up this way here. Kind of like this, so that I'm taking it off of the surface, but it stays inside the indentation where I wanted it to be. Okay, so I'm doing this just by kind of keeping it flat and working careful not to go the same direction as the line. I'm going to get a little bit more water here. Oops, see, I got a little crazy there, so I got to be careful about that. I'm going to let this dry for a second. I'm going to work on this leg right over here. Okay, you can kind of start to see how it's coming off of that part and just staying in the indented part, which is my goal. Okay. And then I can take some of this and kind of blot just a little bit. I'm going to take this here and I'm going to move down this way to kind of get rid of that little bit of glaze that's ended up on my bisqueware that I don't want. Okay, just like that. Okay, you can also use Q-tips. You can also potentially use a sponge maybe if you have kind of a small spot. I would recommend using a sponge if you have like a big area that you're like, oops. So if you accidentally glaze your foot, you can go, whoops, and take that off there because the glaze is water soluble before it is kiln dried. Okay, so I'm going to finish fixing this up and we'll go ahead and jump a couple of spots ahead so you can see how it looks. Okay, guys, so we were working on the indentions here, which I've kind of got, it's a little bit messy. I'm still working on cleaning that up, but I wanted to go ahead and move on to this side just to show you guys what that looks like. Whenever you are working on the main color of your flower pot, I'm actually choosing to do brown for mine, okay? But I'm going to have this color go up and over inside as well. Okay, so I'm going to get the color for that, which I said that I would be using brown. And this color is called caramel. Okay. And again, this looks really, really light. It'll look a lot more intense whenever it comes back from the kiln. And for this, I'm going to choose a bigger brush. And I think that I'm going to go with either of these two. Okay, so this one, they're both round. They both are kind of coarse. This one, though, is only soft at the top. It's kind of, it's had a tough time in its life, right? So from here down, it's very, very like stiff and not super great, but it has a wider, I think I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to go with the smaller one so I can get into those corners. Okay, so what I'm going to do, remember we need 3 layers, and I'm going to start on the inside for this one. So I'm going to take my brush. I don't want to dip it past the metal part. Do not dip it past the metal part. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pick some of this up with a dry brush, and I'm going to start glazing the inside. So remember, you want a nice even coat. And I'm doing this corner in here so I can make sure I get that down in there. Okay, and I am going to do just a little bit down in here. Not too much, but just a little. The nice thing about the glaze is that it kind of helps to seal the clay so that you can actually keep things in it, like, you know, liquids or something along those lines. But without the seal, it'll just kind of dry out. Okay, so now I'm just kind of working up the side here like this, trying to keep a nice even coat. So I don't want it to be super gloopy in some places. I'm gonna make sure it's nice and consistent. Okay, so this is where I'm at so far. And remember, I'm not just totally dunking this down in there. I don't want to go past the metal part of my brush. Okay, if you need to set your brush down at any point in time, you would just set it on the tabletop. Like I said, this glaze, before it is fired, can be easily wiped up with water, and you'll probably end up getting at least a little smear of glaze on your table at some point in time. And when that happens, you'll just clean it up just like you normally would. Just like if it were like clay or watercolors. Okay, so I'm working around here. All the way around like this. Okay, and once I have this fully covered, I'm going to move to my outer part here because I want this part that has the lines, that texture, to kind of look like wood. So I'm going to take this brown, this caramel brown color out onto the outer part as well. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have everything painted over. You don't really want any of the white bisque clay showing through. Okay. And so I'm trying not to overlap this part too much just because I want it to be nice and even and consistent. Okay, so I just keep bringing this through here. And remember, you're using one color at a time. Okay, so my inside is almost done here. All right. Now, once you have completed the inner part, and we're going to double check, and this again is still my first layer. Okay, and I'm actually going to go ahead and come up here to this rim here and take care of that real quick. And I actually, instead of going directly to the outside, what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to go ahead and do my second and third layers in here, just because I don't want to accidentally smear the outside with glaze. So I think it'll be easier that way, even though it dries pretty quickly. I think I want to just focus on getting the inside part done. That way I don't have to hold onto the glaze as I'm working on the inner part again. Okay, so I have this top part here done. Okay, and then I can start again. So I'm gonna go ahead and dip in here. This is my second layer. And I'm gonna start down in the corners just like I did. Okay, now as you're adding on your next layers, I will say it can be a little challenging sometimes to remember exactly where you started. Okay, sometimes I look at my design as my kind of marker for that. So for example, okay, so there's my second layer on the very bottom. Okay, and so I could look at some of my honeycomb here, right? And maybe I could say the middle part of my honeycomb is where I'm going to start on the inside. Okay, so that I know that whenever I work my way back around to the honeycomb, I know I will have finished that first layer, just in case it dries too quickly and I can't tell. Okay, so I would continue working our way around because you can already see the very bottom of it, even though it has a second layer, is drying out pretty quick. Okay, so I'm going to be very methodical about this, so I make sure I get it nice and even. If you don't have an even application, you can really tell at the end. Okay, so I would just bring this all the way around. And once I get my third layer, then I would start on the outer part here. Okay, I wanted to show you just really quickly before we end this video, a couple of pots that did not get the full 3 even layers. Okay, so here is one. This inside, it has a different type of glaze to it, so that's why it looks kind of weirdly speckled. But if you look at the outside, okay, you see some parts that are shiny, but then you see a lot of like white pieces here. And this is the clay that was not covered at all, okay? But you can see some areas where it's darker and lighter, and that's because they didn't put a very even coating on this, okay? So a lot of times when you're glazing, the glaze will gather into kind of some of those smaller spots. But if you have an even layer, even though some spots will look a little bit darker based on how it's laid down, it will still look good. This one, they just didn't get enough even layers on here. Okay, this one's another one. If you notice, it's not shiny at all, really. There's a couple of shiny spots in here, but they maybe only did like 1 layer on this. And so it didn't really show up the way that it was supposed to. It doesn't have that nice glassy look. Okay. And on mine, whenever I get to the outer part here where I have this kind of lined woody looking texture here, what I'm hoping will happen is after I put on those layers of brown is that if the clay or if the glaze gathers anywhere, it'll kind of gather in some of these lines to highlight that texture. Okay. So that's kind of having it work with you as opposed to, this one over here where the layers were so thin that it kind of gathered in some places and then it just isn't even on this little vessel in some places. Okay, so something to keep in mind. Okay, so that's how you glaze your pot. Whenever you're finished with it, you'll put it back over on the cart with the end up here. And of course, whenever you are glazing, you can glaze around the edge here, but your foot itself cannot not be glazed. Okay, so we're gonna leave this plain. We're gonna leave this little part right here plain. Okay, you can bring this over the edge, but I wouldn't go too far with it. Okay, just as long as it looks nice from above, from the sides. Okay, so that's how you glaze. Remember 3 layers. and put it up there. If you don't have enough time, remember only choose one color instead of multiple. But if you do have time, you can have some fun with this.